In the 1980s, Nintendo dominated the video game home console market. I was too young to play the NES at launch, so with the heavy marketing of the last year of the 80s, I became acquainted with that same 4-year-old NES and the Super Mario games. Around that same time, I also got some merchandise from Nintendo, including a magazine, Nintendo's Happy Meal toys for Super Mario Bros. 3 in particular, and playing cards. My dad was an avid collector of baseball cards, and when I was with him, he would buy me some Topps Nintendo cards. Oh, and Nintendo's main business for 100 years prior to video games was making Japanese Hanafuda cards, as a side note. They came with Mario cards, but there was another character I saw that I thought was also part of Mario's universe. He looked like an elf with the pointed ears but wore a green tunic with a green hood and carried a sword and shield. I found out I was wrong when I watched the Super Mario Bros. Super Show and learned that his character, who was named Link, is part of a game series called The Legend of Zelda. My first exposure to The Legend of Zelda was the late 80s cartoon series, also called The Legend of Zelda, that was only 13 episodes that used to air on Fridays in place of the Super Mario cartoon segment of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. The cartoon followed Link and his heroics of protecting the Princess Zelda, but also helped her fight the evil wizard Ganon and his minions in protecting the Triforce of Wisdom that she possesses. The Triforce are 3 golden triangles left behind by the gods, who created the Kingdom of Hyrule, where Link and Princess Zelda live. It was a fun series that introduced me to Link, Princess Zelda, Ganon, and the world of Hyrule, a high fantasy world that is filled with little fairies and different types of creatures, including the spear-throwing moblins, rock-spitting Octoroks, and other monsters, making me interested in playing the actual games. I learned there were 2 different games in the series already out, the one with Zelda in red and one with Link in blue. The only one available at the Regency Video rental store on Cumberland was the game with the title Link in Blue. I rented that, and it played just like a Mario game, a side-scroller but with a new hero fighting with a sword. I couldn't get past the first palace, and we eventually returned the game to the video store. Then my birthday came, and since I already completed all 3 available Mario games at that point before the wee age of 6, my favorite game that birthday came in the form of the Red Zelda game, or the original Legend of Zelda. Let's go back to the early 80s to see where this came from and who made it, shall we? The Legend of Zelda was a project that actually started prior to even Super Mario Bros. In the early 80s by Shigeru Miyamoto due to a lot of adventure-style movies launching, specifically citing the Indiana Jones films and other adventure films of that era. Concept began with 2 players creating mazes or labyrinths and having the other player play the opposing player's labyrinth. They scrapped the creation aspect and just found it fun to just explore the labyrinths. He wanted to create a sword and sorcery themed game with a focus on treasure hunting and fighting enemy monsters. Lots of Miyamoto's ideas that were implemented in the game, like exploration, came from his own childhood, wandering in caves, lakes, and fields near the neighborhood that he lived in. According to Mario and Zelda composer Koji Kondo, Ravel's Bolero was the original theme for Zelda's opening title crawl, but due to copyright and needing to change the theme, Kondo did an all-nighter to come up with the theme, and Miyamoto liked it and compared it to Ennio Morricone's spaghetti western themes. The original name was to be called The Hyrule Fantasy: The Legend of Zelda, but they thought the name was too long, so they just called it The Legend of Zelda, and intended this to be the name of the series, called The Hyrule Fantasy, but shortly, with the release of Final Fantasy and those subsequent games, they decided to ditch the Hyrule Fantasy and just call it the Legend of Zelda series. I turn on the game almost right away to see the epic opening credits, telling the story and showcasing the items and tools that the player will need to obtain to progress in the game. Pressing start to begin the game, the first thing I see is save slots. I had no idea what those were, and it took me a while to get the game started. First ever save slot that I made was just the letter A. Also, this was the first game I ever saved a game in. I didn't know what saving was. You could not do that with the first 3 Mario games. If you turned off the game, you had to start over from the very beginning, so Super Mario 3 was a challenge. It is dangerous to go alone. Take this. The old man in the cave gives you a wooden sword to begin your adventure. The purpose of this game is to locate the 8 missing pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom that Princess Zelda hid away from the clutches of the evil Ganon, a dark, fiendish wizard that covets it and wants to obtain all 3 Triforce in order to remold the world of Hyrule to his liking. Link has to set off into Hyrule with his new sword and shield in hand to find the various labyrinths that are closely guarding the 8 shards of the Triforce of Wisdom. As Link fights his way through and explores each labyrinth, he comes across various items and tools that will help him proceed further in his journey, like bombs, arrows, rafts, step ladders, whistles, food, master keys, etc. Some items Link will need to buy from people, therefore he needs money to purchase them. So whenever Link defeats enemies, he will collect jewels called rupees that are like money in Hyrule. The game is top-down, moving in 4 directions: up, down, left, and right, and there is no platforming involved whatsoever. Since Link can move in any direction, it is really up to the player to figure out where to go next and how to obtain the means to go there. Each labyrinth has hidden a secret treasure or tool that will help Link explore more of Hyrule to access everything. 2 features of Hyrule that are unique to this game is the fact that you can take bombs and bomb any wall, either outside or in the dungeons, to potentially reveal secret rooms or caves. The same can be said for taking the torch and burn down the trees to find secret caves or even secret dungeons. The final dungeon is hidden in a spectacle rock on Death Mountain that you need to bomb, but how would you know this? As you play the game, you find caves or rooms with an old man who will give you cryptic information that you as a player need to put together yourself to figure out. As a kid who was 6 when he first played this game, I wasn't able to complete this game for several years because there was no internet and I didn't have access to the game guides and whatnot. I did eventually figure this out and complete it years after I beat A Link to the Past, the 3rd game in an upcoming video. You beat the game and find out there is a second quest available right away. This second quest, which can also be accessed if you name the save file Zelda, is a new adventure with the labyrinths totally different in layout and content. The enemies are harder, and the locations of the labyrinths that have been moved and are more difficult to find if you don't obtain all the cryptic information. The Legend of Zelda is an incredible game that helped initialize the action-adventure puzzle combination into a new genre that to this day is unparalleled in its quality, its epicness, and the investment in completing this fun fantasy world and all its challenges. This game, once again, was intended to start a new series, and shortly thereafter, another concept originally unrelated to Zelda would join it in what would be compared to an odd but interesting younger brother. That younger brother would grow into what would become Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. The Adventure of Link is a game I played before The Legend of Zelda, but owned it after the latter since I didn't own it until I got it the following Christmas after the birthday I got The Legend of Zelda on. I remember getting The Adventure of Link shortly after Zelda, so I played both of these games simultaneously. Adventure of Link was different, but still had a lot of the same elements as the previous game. Link is an action side-scrolling platformer as opposed to the top-down, puzzle-driven Legend of Zelda. The game takes place 6 years after the original Zelda, with Link now being 16 years old and discovering a Triforce mark on the back of his hand, discovers a hidden room in Hyrule Castle that houses an ancient Zelda who was put to sleep as a result of her jealous brother the Prince, and a wizard wanting to know how to access the 3rd Triforce, the Triforce of Courage. Impa, Zelda's caretaker, tells Link that in order to find the Triforce of Courage, he will need to access the Great Palace in the Valley of Death, infested with invisible eyes of Ganon. In order to break the magical barrier of the Great Palace, Link will need to bring 6 crystals and place them in 6 statues in the 6 palaces spread out in Hyrule. The statues are protected by guardians, and not just anybody can access it. Guardians include Horsehead, Germafencer, Rebanak, Karak, Guma, and Barba. In this game, Hyrule consists of 2 continents and 2 islands and 8 towns where you upgrade health, learn magic abilities, and new tools to access newer areas on the map. Towns in this game is where you get most of your information on potential secrets, puzzles, and what you need to progress in a certain area. As Link sets out on his adventure, Ganon's minions want revenge and pursue Link for his blood to revive their master. Therefore, every time you get a game over screen, Ganon is there laughing at you. I was actually disappointed there was no Ganon at the end of this game, a red herring of sort. You complete the 6 palaces, traversing them and finding keys to eventually get to the Guardian and the statue, and is repeated until you go to the Great Palace to get the Triforce. The Great Palace's name is not exaggerated, and it is a literal maze that you can easily get lost in, with newer enemies that are way more difficult than the previous 6 palaces. The 2 bosses in this Great Palace are Thunderbird, and when you approach the Triforce, an old man there casts a spell, and Link's shadow, or Dark Link, appears as a final battle or trial. The fight is tough, but winnable, and you obtain the Triforce and awaken the ancient Zelda to live happily ever after. The music for Zelda 2 was not composed by Koji Kondo, but by Ice Climbers composer Akito Nakatsuka. The music had an equivalent overworld theme with the same opening riff, and then goes into its own direction. The rest of the music, like the Palace theme, was reused in the later Super Smash Bros. Games, but not really used again in later Zelda games, mainly in favor of Kondo's work. Another flavor of epic video game music. This game was instrumental in the development of the later Zelda games, beginning with A Link to the Past in terms of introducing to the series boss themes, magic meters, adult Link, towns with non-playable characters and talking to them for information, active combat, and magic abilities. People give this game a lot of crap for being different in the series, but this game is still important to the history of the franchise and its future moving forward. My story does not end here with Zelda, since I still play Zelda games to this very day, from A Link to the Past to Breath of the Wild. And despite Breath of the Wild's flaws, I'm still looking forward to Breath of the Wild 2, and hope the series can return to some traditional form with traditional dungeons and finding treasure that will affect the course of the game. I plan to do future videos of the different games in the Zelda series, starting with A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, and take it from there. Even though I completed and beat A Link to the Past first, there is still a place in my heart for these 2 original games. And with the countless re-releases on Switch Online, or the NES Mini, or emulated, these 2 games introduced adventure and treasure hunting and the fantasy genre into my life, and have never really left me ever since. On the next episode, you were wondering how Link would transition to the 16-bit era, right? What direction would Nintendo go in moving forward with the 2 previous Zelda titles being almost polar opposites? When would this next installment take place? Who is this wizard that is causing the disappearance of several maidens throughout Hyrule? Why is Princess Zelda imprisoned? Does Link have the courage to face this new evil threat? All this and more on the next episode of Nerdporial Game Reviews, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. Is there another world other than this? Keep those Nerdporial tools handy and make sure you're still subbed. May the legends of the heroes continue. See you next time.